The small town of Mapleton wasn't known for much, just a sleepy downtown with a single traffic light, a diner that served the best blueberry pancakes this side of the Mississippi, and summers that seemed to stretch on forever. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your business before you did, where front doors remained unlocked, and where childhood friendships were forged in backyard tree houses and secret hideouts by the creek. This was where I, Alex Mitchell, spent the first 18 years of my life before escaping to college and eventually settling in Chicago. Don't get me wrong, I loved my hometown, but as a gay teenager struggling with my identity, those tree-lined streets sometimes felt more like prison walls than protection. Growing up, Jake Thompson was my everything, my best friend, my confidant, my secret crush. We were inseparable from the moment we met in kindergarten when he shared his animal crackers with me after a fifth grader stole mine. Jake was everything I wasn't: athletic, effortlessly popular, and undeniably straight. He dated the prettiest girls in school, was quarterback of the football team, and somehow still found time to build model airplanes and watch sci-fi marathons with me on weekends. I kept my feelings buried deep, convinced that revealing them would destroy the most important relationship in my life. After high school, life took us in different directions. I headed to Northwestern to study architecture, finally finding the freedom to come out and live authentically. Jake went to Ohio State on a football scholarship before an injury sidelined his athletic career, pushing him toward business management instead. We stayed in touch through occasional texts and social media likes, but our once unbreakable bond had stretched thin over the years, reduced to holiday greetings and birthday wishes. That's why my heart nearly stopped when I received his text last Thursday. "Hey stranger, I've got an interview in Chicago next week. Any chance I could crash at your place for a night or two? Would love to catch up. Would love to catch up." 5 simple words that sent my mind spiraling through a kaleidoscope of emotions: excitement, anxiety, hope, and dread, all competing for dominance. I stared at my phone for a full 5 minutes before responding with a casual, "Absolutely. Mi casa es su casa. Just let me know when." Inside, I was anything but casual. The prospect of seeing Jake again after nearly 3 years was exhilarating and terrifying. What would he think of the urban, openly gay Alex? Would there be awkwardness between us? And most concerning, had I truly moved past my feelings for him, or was I setting myself up for another round of heartache? The next few days were a blur of frantic cleaning, grocery shopping, and second-guessing every decision from my choice of sheets to the beer brand in my fridge. I even rearranged my furniture twice, trying to make my modest one-bedroom apartment seem more spacious and impressive. Looking back, I realized I was trying to prove something, that I had made it, that leaving Mapleton had been the right choice, that I was thriving in my new life. But deep down, I was still that insecure kid seeking Jake's approval. When the doorbell finally rang on Tuesday evening, my palms were sweating so badly, I had to wipe them on my jeans before opening the door. And there he was, Jake Thompson, standing on my doorstep with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and that crooked smile that had haunted my dreams for years. He looked different, yet exactly the same. His sandy blonde hair was shorter, more professional than the shaggy style he'd sported in high school. He'd filled out, his shoulders broader under his navy button-down shirt. But his eyes were the same clear blue that had always reminded me of summer skies in Mapleton. "Alex," he exclaimed, dropping his bag and pulling me into a bear hug that lifted me off my feet. "Man, it's good to see you." The familiar scent of his cologne, woody with hints of citrus, brought back a flood of memories. Studying together in his bedroom, road trips to the lake, countless movie nights where I'd been hyper-aware of every accidental touch. "You too," I managed, trying to ignore the way my heart was racing. Come in, come in. How was your flight?" And just like that, the years of distance seemed to evaporate. We fell back into our easy rhythm, talking and laughing as I showed him around my apartment and ordered pizza from my favorite local place. Jake filled me in on his life in Columbus, his job at a marketing firm, his recent breakup with a girlfriend of 2 years, his dreams of moving to a bigger city. I told him about my work at an up-and-coming architecture firm, my small but tight-knit group of friends, my disastrous attempts at dating in the age of apps. "So no special someone?" Jake asked, taking a swig of beer as we sat on my couch, empty pizza box between us. There was something in his tone I couldn't quite place. Curiosity? Relief? I shook my head. "Not at the moment. I had a boyfriend for about 8 months last year, but we wanted different things. What I didn't say was how every relationship I'd had seemed to fall short of some impossible standard, a standard that, if I was honest with myself, had Jake's face. That's how it was with Melissa, he said, picking at the label on his beer bottle. She wanted the whole white picket fence thing right away. I don't know if I'm ready for all that. Sometimes I feel like I'm still figuring out who I am, you know? I didn't know. And hearing Jake express the same uncertainty I often felt was both comforting and surprising. In my mind, he had always been so sure of himself, so confident in his path. This glimpse of vulnerability made him seem more human, more accessible somehow. We stayed up late into the night, reminiscing about old times and filling in the gaps of our separate lives. It was nearly 2 in the morning when Jake mentioned his interview the next day. It's with this sports marketing agency downtown, he explained, stifling a yawn. They've got clients all over the Midwest. Could be a great opportunity. That sounds perfect for you, I said, genuinely happy for him. Combining your business background with your sports knowledge. He nodded, a flash of excitement crossing his face. And if I get it, we'd be in the same city again. Just like old times, but with fewer curfews and better alcohol. The thought of Jake living in Chicago, of potentially having him back in my daily life, sent a complicated mix of emotions through me. Part of me thrilled at the idea, while another part, the self-protective part, warned of the dangers of reopening old wounds. The next morning, I woke to the sounds of Jake getting ready. He looked sharp in his interview suit, and I felt a familiar pang of admiration as I made us coffee. After a quick breakfast, I wished him luck, and he headed out with promises to text me afterward. I spent the day distracted at work, checking my phone more often than I'd like to admit, wondering how his interview was going and what it might mean for our future, as friends, of course. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a message from Jake. Interview went great. Taking me to dinner tonight to meet the team. Then catching the 9:30 train back to Columbus to grab some stuff. They want me to start Monday, if all goes well. I texted back my congratulations, ignoring the small voice in my head that whispered about the complications his presence in Chicago might bring. Instead, I focused on being happy for my friend and his new opportunity. When I got home that evening, I cleaned up the living room and changed the sheets on my bed, where Jake had slept the night before. I had taken the couch, insisting that my guest deserved the more comfortable option. Now, with Jake out for the evening and planning to head straight back to Columbus afterward, I could reclaim my space and perhaps start processing the whirlwind of emotions his visit had stirred up. I was halfway through a documentary about urban planning when my phone rang around 10:15 p.m. Jake's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, how was dinner?" I answered, expecting to hear about his evening with his potential new colleagues. Instead, Jake's frustrated voice came through the speaker. "I missed the train." "What? How?" What followed was a tale of comedic misfortune that only Jake could experience. A series of events involving a misplaced wallet, a detour to help an elderly woman who had dropped her groceries, and finally, arriving at the station just as the train pulled away. As he recounted the story, I could picture his expressive gestures and the way his eyes would widen at particularly dramatic moments. It was so quintessentially Jake that I couldn't help but laugh. "It's not funny, Alex," he protested, though I could hear the smile in his voice. "Now I'm stranded until tomorrow morning's train." "Not stranded," I corrected him. "You can come back to my place. The sheets are already changed." There was a brief pause before Jake asked, "You sure? I don't want to impose." "Don't be ridiculous. We've had sleepovers since we were 7. What's one more night?" And that's how, an hour later, Jake Thompson was back in my apartment, having shed his interview suit for sweatpants and a worn Ohio State t-shirt. We opened a couple more beers and settled on the couch to watch a sci-fi movie, just like we used to do in high school. It felt surreal and familiar all at once, this echo of our past relationship playing out in my adult space. As the night wore on and the movie ended, I started making up the couch for myself again. Jake watched me from the kitchen doorway, a strange expression on his face. "This is silly," he said finally. "Your couch is too small for you. We can share the bed. It's not like we haven't done it before." My hands stilled on the sheets. He was right. We had shared beds countless times during sleepovers and family vacations. But that was before I had come out, before the unspoken boundaries between us had shifted. Still, refusing would make things weird. would suggest that something had changed when I'd spent years pretending nothing had. Sure, I said, aiming for nonchalance. If you don't mind. Why would I mind? Jake asked, his tone light, but his eyes searching mine for something I couldn't identify. That's how I found myself lying next to Jake in my queen-sized bed, hyper-aware of every inch of space between us. We both stared at the ceiling, the darkness of the room making it easier to speak. Remember when we used to stay up all night at sleepovers? Jake asked softly. Your mom would come in and tell us to go to sleep like 3 times. I smiled at the memory. And we'd pretend to be asleep until she left, then go right back to talking. You always fell asleep first, he reminded me. Mid-sentence sometimes. I did not. You absolutely did. You'd be telling me about some book you were reading or some building you thought was cool, and suddenly, silence. I'd look over, and you'd be out cold. The fondness in his voice made my chest ache. These were the moments I had missed most. The easy conversation, the shared history, the feeling that someone in the world knew me completely. Jake, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah. I'm really glad you missed your train. He turned his head to look at me, his profile barely visible in the dim light filtering through my curtains. Me too. We fell silent then, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. I felt myself relaxing, the tension I'd been carrying since his arrival finally beginning to ease. Can I ask you something? Jake said after a while, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Of course. He shifted onto his side, facing me fully now. When did you know? That you were gay, I mean. The question caught me off guard. We had never really talked about my sexuality in depth. When I came out to him during freshman year of college, over a stilted phone call, he had been supportive but brief. Cool, man. Thanks for telling me. Doesn't change anything. And that had been that. I think I always knew on some level, I answered honestly. But I didn't have the words for it until high school. And I didn't accept it until college. Were you ever going to tell me? In high school, I mean. I swallowed hard. I wanted to. Many times. But I was scared. Of what? Of everything changing. Of losing you. Of you figuring out how I felt about you. I didn't add. Jake was quiet for so long I thought he might have fallen asleep. Then he said, I wish you had told me. I hate thinking that you were dealing with that alone. I wasn't completely alone, I assured him. And coming out is complicated. You do it when you're ready, not when other people want you to. He nodded, seeming to accept this. You know, after you came out, I looked back at our friendship and wondered if there were signs I missed. If you ever, I don't know, felt something for me. My heart stopped. This was the conversation I had both dreaded and fantasized about for years. In my daydreams. This was where I confessed my feelings and Jake miraculously returned them. In my nightmares. This was where our friendship imploded beyond repair. Jake, I started, not sure where I was going with it. It's okay if you did, he said quickly. I just always wondered. The darkness gave me courage. Yes, I admitted. I had feelings for you in high school, but I knew you were straight, and your friendship meant too much to me to risk it. I held my breath, waiting for his reaction. Would he be uncomfortable? Would he pull away? Instead, he surprised me. I'm flattered, he said softly. Really? And if things were different? Don't, I interrupted. You don't have to say that. I'm not just saying it, he insisted. I've always thought that if I were ever going to be with a guy, it would be you. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. I didn't know how to respond. Was this just a hypothetical for him? A compliment meant to ease any lingering awkwardness? Or was there something more behind his words? That's quite a statement from a straight guy. I finally said, trying to keep my tone light. Jake was quiet again, and I sensed he was wrestling with something. What if? He began, then stopped. What if I told you I'm not as straight as I've always thought? My breath caught in my throat. What are you saying, Jake? He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I recognized from our youth. I don't know what I'm saying. That's the problem. I've only ever been with women. I've only ever dated women. But sometimes I think about other possibilities. And being here with you, talking like this, it's making me question things I've never let myself question before. I propped myself up on one elbow, trying to see his face more clearly in the darkness. Jake, are you telling me you might be bisexual? Maybe? I don't know. I've never put a label on it because I've never acted on it. It's always been this abstract thing in the back of my mind. My heart was racing now. And what about now? Is it still abstract? The air between us seemed charged with possibility. Jake reached out slowly, his hand finding mine on top of the covers. Not as abstract as it used to be. I didn't move, afraid that any sudden motion might break whatever spell had fallen over us. Jake, I don't want to be an experiment. Or something you regret in the morning. You could never be either of those things, he said with such conviction that I almost believed him. You're Alex. You're important to me. We were so close now that I could feel his breath on my face. The moment stretched between us, taut with tension and possibility. Then Jake laughed softly, breaking the spell. What's funny? I asked, confused by the sudden shift. Nothing, just, this is not how I expected this trip to go. I thought we'd catch up, maybe grab a beer, and that would be it. Instead, I'm having an existential crisis in your bed. I couldn't help but laugh too. The absurdity of the situation hit me all at once. My straight childhood crush questioning his sexuality while sharing my bed after missing his train. It was like the plot of a rom-com I would normally roll my eyes at. Our laughter brought us closer, physically and emotionally. And then, in a moment I still replay in my mind, Jake's laughter faded, and he looked at me with an intensity that made my breath hitch. Before I could process what was happening, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to mine. The kiss was tentative at first, a question more than a declaration. But when I responded, wrapping my arm around his waist to pull him closer, something shifted. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, more certain. Jake's hand came up to cup my face, his thumb tracing my cheekbone in a gesture so tender it made my heart ache. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing heavily. Jake rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. Wow, he whispered. Yeah, I agreed, unable to form a more coherent response. We stayed like that for a moment, suspended in the aftermath of what had just happened. Then Jake pulled back slightly, his expression turning serious. I don't know what this means, he admitted. I don't know what happens next. We don't have to figure it all out tonight. I told him, though part of me desperately wanted answers, wanted assurances that this wasn't just a one-time thing, a curiosity satisfied and then forgotten. Jake nodded, seeming relieved. Can we just be here, together, and worry about labels and definitions tomorrow? We can do that, I agreed, though my mind was already racing ahead, imagining scenarios both wonderful and heartbreaking. We settled back down, closer than before, Jake's arm draped over my waist. It felt surreal, like a dream I'd had countless times, but never expected to come true. As Jake's breathing evened out and he drifted towards sleep, I stayed awake, memorizing the feeling of his body next to mine, afraid that morning would bring regret and distance. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through my curtains and the space beside me was empty. Panic gripped me for a moment. Had Jake left? Was he so horrified by what had happened that he couldn't even face me? But then I heard movement in the kitchen, the familiar sound of cabinet doors opening and closing. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by anxiety. What would Jake say in the harsh light of day? Would he brush off our kiss as a moment of curiosity, a one-time experiment? I forced myself out of bed, pulling on a t-shirt to go with my pajama pants. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway and followed the sounds to the kitchen. Jake was standing at the counter, his back to me, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He was already dressed in jeans and a fresh t-shirt, his hair damp from a shower. At the sound of my footsteps, he turned, a tentative smile on his face. "Morning," he said, holding out a mug to me. "I hope you don't mind that I made coffee." "Not at all," I replied, taking the offered cup, careful not to let our fingers brush. "Thanks." An awkward silence fell between us, so different from the easy conversation of the night before. I took a sip of coffee to give myself something to do, waiting for Jake to make the first move. "About last night," he finally said, leaning back against the counter. "I want you to know that I don't regret it." Relief flooded through me, though I tried not to show it. "You don't?" He shook his head. "No. It was something I think I've wanted to do for a while, but never let myself acknowledge." "So what does that mean? For you, I mean." Jake ran a hand through his hair, that familiar nervous gesture again. "I don't know exactly. I'm still figuring it out. But I know that I care about you, Alex. More than just as a friend. And that scares me a little." "Why does it scare you?" I asked, setting my coffee down and taking a step closer to him. Because it changes everything. How I see myself, how others see me, what my future might look like. He looked up, meeting my eyes. And because I don't want to hurt you. You've been important to me for too long. I understood his fears all too well. Coming to terms with your sexuality was never easy, and doing it later in life, after establishing an identity and expectations, was especially challenging. Jake, I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now, or to make any declarations. But I need to know if this is something you want to explore further, or if last night was a one-time thing that we chalk up to curiosity and move on from. He reached out, taking my hand in his. It wasn't just curiosity, Alex, and I don't want to move on from it. But I also don't know exactly what I'm ready for. I squeezed his hand. That's fair. We can take it slow, figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations. The relief on his face was palpable. Thank you for understanding. Of course, this isn't exactly familiar territory for me either, you know. Being with someone who's still figuring things out. Jake pulled me closer, wrapping his arms around me in a hug that felt both familiar and thrillingly new. I'm glad it's you I'm figuring things out with, he murmured against my hair. We stayed like that for a moment, holding each other in my sunlit kitchen. Then Jake pulled back slightly, his expression turning more practical. I should probably book a train ticket for today. My new job starts Monday, and I need to get back to Columbus to pack up my apartment. Reality intruded on our bubble, reminding me that despite the emotional revelations of the night, Jake still lived in another state. At least for now. When will you be moving to Chicago? I asked, trying to sound casual. They want me to start next week, so I'll need to find a temporary place right away. Then I can look for something more permanent. He hesitated, then added, maybe you could help me apartment hunt? You know the city better than I do. The request was innocent enough, but I sensed the underlying question. How much of a role did I want to play in his new life here? Was I willing to be part of his journey of self-discovery, even if it might not lead where I hoped? I'd like that, I said honestly. And you're welcome to stay here again when you come back, if you want. Jake's smile was worth any potential heartache. I was hoping you'd say that. We spent the rest of the morning planning his move, looking at neighborhoods online, and discussing the logistics of his new job. It was strange how quickly we shifted from the emotional intensity of our conversation to these practical matters, but also comforting. This was how relationships developed. Moments of profound connection interspersed with the mundane details of daily life. All too soon, it was time for Jake to leave for the train station. This time, I insisted on accompanying him, not willing to say goodbye at my apartment door. As we walked to the station, our hands brushed occasionally, neither of us quite brave enough to intertwine our fingers on a public street. At the platform, with the train already boarding, Jake turned to me, his expression serious. I meant what I said, Alex. I want to see where this goes. I just need a little time to adjust to everything. I understand, I assured him. I've had years to come to terms with who I am. It's only fair to give you the same space. He smiled, then glanced around quickly before leaning in to give me a brief but firm kiss. I'll text you when I get back to Columbus. And then he was gone, boarding the train with one last wave. I stood on the platform until the train pulled away, feeling a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Hope, certainly. Anxiety, definitely. But also a strange sense of peace. Whatever happened next, something had shifted between us, a door opened that had been closed for too long. True to his word, Jake texted me that evening to let me know he'd arrived safely. And over the next few days, our communication increased, texts throughout the day, phone calls in the evening, even a video chat as he packed up his apartment. We didn't talk much about what had happened between us, focusing instead on the practicalities of his move and catching up on the years we'd missed in each other's lives. But there was an undercurrent to our conversations now, a new awareness that made even the most mundane exchanges feel charged with possibility. A week later, Jake returned to Chicago with 2 suitcases and a job offer officially accepted. As promised, he stayed with me while he looked for his own place. Those days were a strange mix of domestic bliss and cautious navigation. We shared my bed again, sometimes just sleeping, sometimes exploring this new physical dimension of our relationship. Jake was hesitant at first, but increasingly confident as he discovered what he liked, what made both of us feel good. We talked more openly about his feelings, about the confusion and excitement of discovering this part of himself. I think I've always known on some level, he admitted one night as we lay together in the darkness. But it was easier to ignore it, to focus on what was expected of me. I understood that all too well. Society has a way of making us believe there's only one acceptable path, I told him. It takes courage to step off that path and find your own way. Jake was quiet for a moment, then said, I'm still afraid sometimes. Of what people will think, of how this changes who I am. It doesn't change who you are, I assured him. It just reveals more of who you've always been. He kissed me then, with a tenderness that made my heart ache. How did you get so wise? Years of therapy, I joked, making him laugh. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment for both of us. Jake found an apartment not far from mine, a small one-bedroom that he furnished with a mix of items from his place in Columbus and new purchases we picked out together. He threw himself into his new job, impressing his bosses with his enthusiasm and fresh ideas. And slowly, cautiously, we began to build something that looked increasingly like a relationship. There were challenges, of course. Jake wasn't ready to come out to his family or colleagues, which meant navigating social situations carefully. We had our first fight when he introduced me as his friend from high school to his new coworkers at a company happy hour. I understood his caution, but it still stung to be relegated to the role I'd played for so many years. I'm not asking you to announce your sexuality to the world, I told him afterward, as we walked home in tense silence. But I don't want to go backward either. I don't want to pretend we're just friends when we're so much more than that. Jake was quiet for a long moment, then said, You're right. I'm sorry. This is all new to me, and I'm still figuring out how to navigate it. But that's not an excuse for making you feel less important than you are. It was these moments of honesty and growth that convinced me we had a chance at something real. Jake was willing to examine his fears and push past them, to prioritize our relationship even when it was uncomfortable or scary. 3 months after his initial visit, 3 months of dates and discussions, of physical exploration and emotional revelations, Jake took me to dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. He seemed nervous all evening, checking his phone repeatedly and fidgeting with his silverware. Is everything okay? I finally asked, concerned by his unusual behavior. He took a deep breath, then reached across the table to take my hand. Better than okay. I wanted to tell you something important. My heart raced. What is it? I came out to my parents yesterday, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. I told them about us. I stared at him, speechless. Jake had been so hesitant about telling his family, worried about their reaction, especially his father's. What did they say? I finally managed to ask. A smile broke across his face. My mom said she'd suspected for years. My dad was quieter, but he said he loves me no matter what. And they both want to meet you, properly this time, as my boyfriend. Boyfriend. The word sent a thrill through me. We hadn't used labels until now, both of us cautious for different reasons. Jake, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. He squeezed my hand. I couldn't have done it without you. You've shown me that being true to myself doesn't mean losing everything else I care about. It just means building a more authentic life. As we finished our dinner, making plans for a visit to see his parents, I marveled at how far we'd come from that unexpected night when Jake missed his train. What had seemed like a simple mishap had turned out to be the beginning of something profound, a journey of self-discovery for Jake, and a second chance at love for both of us. Life isn't always a neat narrative, of course. We still had challenges ahead. Jake's continuing process of coming out to friends and extended family, my own insecurities about whether his feelings would last, the practical complications of building a life together. But sitting across from him that night, seeing the love and certainty in his eyes, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. Sometimes the most unexpected detours lead us exactly where we need to go. Jake missing his train that night wasn't just a comedic mishap. It was the universe giving us a nudge, creating space for truth and connection to emerge. And while I don't know exactly what the future holds for us, I'm grateful every day for that missed train, for the courage Jake found to explore his feelings, and for the second chance we've been given to transform our friendship into something even more beautiful and true. In the end, love isn't about labels or expectations or predetermined paths. It's about finding someone who sees you completely and loves you anyway, someone who makes you brave enough to be your authentic self. Jake and I spent years circling around the truth of our connection, but now that we've found our way to each other, I plan to hold on tight. Because some journeys are worth the wait, and some destinations feel exactly like coming home. Total _char_count, 18,862.